Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players podcast. This is our show for, Tuesday, July 25th. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you from the little house on the east side for the first time in a long time. Not out in the studio yet, haven't gotten that set up, but just here at the kitchen table with the bar behind me. And I am joined by a man across town coming to us from the Casa Roja. He is, and you see a little bit of that Roja in there, he is Jonathan Kenshin. What's up, JK?
PTF, what's going on? I'm just sitting outside. I got kicked out of the downstairs studio. I had it reserved, and then we were a little bit late, and then Jovanina's AirPods weren't charged, and she gave me that look of like, am I going to have to jack with these AirPods charging for the next 12 minutes while you sit there and talk with Pete about who you like in the fifth while I want to get on the Peloton? And I said, oh, no, honey, I'm going to go outside and do the podcast today.
Works out very well. So I just arrived in town, got here in time to do a great rainy day activity this summer up in Saratoga. Went to the movie theater in the middle of town, and at the request of Perrin, we did Barbenheimer. And let me tell you, it was a wild and fun movie-going experience, except for the fact that I was a little bit freaked out about my 10-year-old daughter enjoying a 3-hour biopic about Oppenheimer, because I didn't know who half the characters were, what was going on, and she seemed to grasp it better than me. So I don't know what that says about me. I don't know what that says about her, but it was certainly a good way to spend a rainy Monday up here at the spa.
Well, we went up to Lake George. The weather looked like it was going to be perfect. We went up to Lake George. We did the Sagamore, little lifestyle podcast in the middle of a podcast. $20, you get a day pass. You can go in and like eat lunch at the Sagamore. You can even like hang out by like the lake and like their kind of little pool area. If you're swift enough, you can go into the pool area and get when the gates open, grab a couple towels, and no one really gives you a hard time at all. I don't even think it's an illegal move, to be fair. But we did that yesterday. But it started to rain a little bit, so we had to punt a little bit early. But that was our dark day event.
That's not a bad one. That's definitely a fun place to check out. Yeah, the dark day stuff is always interesting to see different people's approaches to it, whether you're hunkered down with the form or out trying to enjoy some of the other local stuff that you and G covered so well in that lifestyle pod. We encourage people to check that out. The Del Mar show we did last week was super fun as well, and we've gotten a ton of good feedback on that. You can see that if you're heading out west. Yeah, I'm dizzy, JK. I barely know where in the world I am at this point. It was great to be out there in San Diego for the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation Day on Saturday. Met a ton of nice and interesting people, obviously all for a great cause. Got to catch up with old pals out there, and it just made me realize I've got to get in the habit of getting back to Del Mar during the summer meet as well as the fall meet. It's hard to miss a weekend here, but it's worth it. It's such a different and special experience. I imagine you miss going out there in the summer. Not that you were ever like a regular, but you hit several summers in a row out there, right?
Yeah, I think I went every summer since 15 until I started, being on the Fox show here. Although there is that one summer that Austin and I, they had their contest there. They canceled here the day before because of weather, and Austin and I jumped in an Uber, went down to JFK. We flew to LAX. We spent the night at the hotel at LAX. The next morning, we got on a plane to Del Mar. We were at Del Mar for day one of the contest. I blew on day one of the contest. So on day two, we flew back to Austin. I dropped him off in Austin, and then I came back to New York, and I was back at work on Wednesday.
I think the craziest part of that story is taking a plane from LAX to San Diego. It's like a 70-minute drive, right?
A 70-minute drive at 3:00 in the morning. If you go at the wrong time, it's a 4-hour drive.
That's fair.
4 hours. So that was when I had flight benefits before some guy that worked at the Daily Racing Forum wrote an article about me, and then they researched me and I got in trouble.
You're blaming me for that?
No, not at all. Not at all. No, not at all. Not at all.
That's low even for you. We only have a few minutes to catch up today, but I really wanted to get you on here. I think what we'll do is we'll do something very non-traditional for an early week show, and we'll do a second half of the podcast, of the audio version anyway, where it's me and somebody else going over Wednesday. What you got? You got an idea on that?
No, we're gonna do. We didn't talk about this, but I think there's two things we can do. One, we can talk about a horse that's near and dear to us, the Sacred Wish, almost winning the Grade 1 for our friends at Black Type Thoroughbreds. We can talk about that. I guess was the highlight of the weekend in that Grade 1, and then we can also. We don't always have this. One of the great things about Saratoga, we can talk a little bit about who I think is possibly the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint winner, who will be running tomorrow on Wednesday at Saratoga, Echo Zulu.
We're going to get there. We're going to get there. Let's start actually just to be a thumb in your eye. We'll start before we get to Sacred Wish with the graded action from Sunday, the match race between Nest and Clairiere. I think it's a really interesting discussion point coming out of it. First of all, incredible training job with Nest. Very interesting betting situation here where the tote had it one way. The tote had it. Didn't Clairiere go favored on the tote? Like 3-5 to 4-5 in the international betting for whatever reason. Clairiere was there 11-8. That's like our 6-5. So I like incredibly confidently tipped Clairiere, basically saying worst case here, you're getting 6-5 on a coin flip. And I really thought there was a chance that Nest, with all her work done against a 3-year-old class last year that hasn't exactly covered themselves, or her best work anyway, hasn't exactly covered themselves in glory. I thought there was just some question whether she was even as good as Clairiere coming in. You certainly can't say that coming out. What were your thoughts on the Shuvee?
Well, I mean, look, I think there's a couple of conversations to be had. One is, I heard a lot of rumblings about it being a 4-horse field and that not being the most exciting thing in the world. But I don't know, if you owned a horse that was in that division, would you want to waste a race against those two horses? I personally wouldn't, because there's other races that you can show up in and try to get some graded placings, and or it's just these horses only have so many races in their careers. Do you really want to waste time in those situations? So I had no problem with the fact that that's what it was. I would imagine the Personal Ensign would likely be a little bit of a larger field with the Grade 1 placing involved. But so I guess my thoughts about it is that Nest hinted at being brilliant, right? She last year, and she was brilliant for a 3-year-old, but there's always that question mark of well, what's going to happen when she faces olders? And what doesn't happen very often, and people will complain about the rich getting richer and rich owners. One thing that's good about a rich owner is they don't need the money, and they don't have to sell the horse, and they can bring them back as a 4-year-old, right? Because if you and I owned Nest, she would have been in that ring at Fasig-Tipton in November. But since Mike Rapoli and Eclipse Thoroughbreds owns Nest, we got to see her run as a 4-year-old. And when you allow these horses to run as 4-year-olds and to grow up outside of their great 3-year-old years, this is what you get. And as much as I love Clairiere, and as good as I think Clairiere is, I do not think Clairiere will beat Nest again.
Yeah, I mean, based on what we saw the other day, it's reasonable. I mean, we'll see big full field dynamics, etc. What did you think going in? Were you on TV for this, and who did you tip, or did you bet the race?
No, I was, and I was on TV, and I don't remember who I picked. I always forget. I think I picked Nest. I don't. It's the least of my concerns, to be fair, because that's not how I play. In multi-race bets, I use both of them. This was a race, I love in races where there's two horses to narrow to one. I couldn't narrow to one.
I assumed it was one of those for you. I assumed it was one of those.
Well, just because to your point, I didn't know if Ness was going to come back a little short. I mean, that obviously you don't bring back a 3-year-old champion to win the Shuvee. No offense to the Shuvee. That's not why you bring that horse back. You bring her back to win the Personal Ensign. You bring her back to win the Beldame, and you bring her back to win the Breeders' Cup Distaff, not to win the Shuvee. And so it would have been entirely reasonable for her not to fire her best shot. Well, she's just that damn good. She was impressive.
Yeah, and maybe going to go on from there. Very interesting race figure-wise, too. I saw the buyer came back like surprisingly light. It's listed here in the stakes results page on drf.com as a 94. Timeform has it faster. Independent figure makers I checked in with have it faster. It also wasn't a fast pace, so I don't know. I'm not buying that 94. It looked like a triple-digit figure, and I'm assuming that's what it was. I mean, that's what Timeform had. That's what seems to be the consensus outside of DRF. Does that concern you at all that the published figure – were you aware of that the published figure was that low, and do you agree with me that it just sounds too low?
No. Yeah, I mean, well, yes. I mean, look, the science is the science. But that's what's great about speed figures is that
It's a
they
lot
have
of
a
art
human
in
touch to
addition
them.
to the science.
Yeah. I will say this though, when there is a slow paced race, they can only come home so fast. So the final time in a figure like the buyer figure is a final time figure. The final time is limited to what it can be if they go so slow early. So I don't have a, I mean, I guess he could have projected up, but he just wasn't feeling like he wanted to do that, which is fine with me. I don't think there's a mare in this country that can beat Nest. And if Nest isn't in the race, I don't think there's a mare in this country that really wants to beat Clairiere either. So I think those were the two best. And I think the number's probably a little light, but I'm okay with it.
Let's go on to the race on Saturday, the CCA Oaks. I was rooting like a lunatic in the press box for Sacred Wish, and I was celebrating early, not because I thought she'd necessarily put the race away, but just because it was obvious she couldn't run out of the top three, and just for what that meant for her. Of course, then there was that moment where you thought she was going to win the race, which would have been all that much better from a black type thoroughbreds fanboy such as myself perspective. In the end, Wet Paint had other things to say and gets the job done there. How did you? We talked about this one on air, so I know you liked Wet Paint. I know you liked Sacred Wish. Were you happy with how you ended up betting this race? What were your thoughts in general on the CCA Oaks?
Yeah, it was a tricky stretch run, but I had said it on the Fox show leading up to it. It was a tricky emotional stretch run for me because obviously I from a betting standpoint, I singled Wet Paint. I thought Wet Paint was the horse that was going to win, based off of that biased closing situation that she had against Hoosier Philly at Ellis and the Monomoy girl. And then, so that was a strong opinion I had, and I loved her in the Oak, so I had to kind of love her in this spot based off of that performance. But then in the stretch, it was tricky because, and I had said it on the show as well, that emotionally my wager is on Sacred Wish after watching the George Weaver and Cindy Hutter piece about
Yep.
George and his wife and the tragedy that they've gone through and getting to the other side of it. I was emotionally rooting for a horse like Sacred Wish, but then also our friends Jake Ballas at Black Type Thoroughbreds, Matt Miller, and Reagan Swinbank, who the horse was wearing Reagan silks for the first time in a Grade One. Reagan silks made their debut, so it was a tricky emotional stretch drive for me. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. At the top of the stretch, you knew that she was going to get that Grade One placing, and I know there are friends, and I promise I would say this if they weren't. The run they are on, purchasing privately and getting black type and graded stakes with horses is unbelievable. Crimson Advocate won at Ascot, passed the Champagne, was second in a Grade One after they bought her as a maiden. Hidden Connection won a graded stakes after they purchased her. Sacred Wish, another one who's Grade One placed. I mean, they are on a serious run, and very proud of what Maddie and Jake are doing.
Let's talk about Monmouth. I don't know. I assume you had the second screen situation, watching all of the action down there. We had the Haskell Stakes, of course, the big one of the day, one of the two Grade Ones, and in the end, Go Rocket Ride stepped up big time and got the job done. And I gotta say, it sounded like all the rumblings out of the Mage camp going in about how he was maybe a little bit of a short horse, how it was more of a prep. That's exactly how it played out, because he went there to win the race, and it just looked like he got a little bit tired in a canny ride and a terrific finish by Mike Smith. And seeing Richard Mandela and Mike Smith in the winner's circle there, that was nice too. I mean, I wasn't clever enough to bet the horse. I certainly understood the horse, but very interesting new player in this 3-year-old scene. How much did you like Go Rocket Ride?
I didn't. I mean, I was an Arabian Night guy myself, in that situation, and the pace, it kind of cooked up a little bit, and he had some company on the front end. But Mays ran extremely well, and I think Mays is set up nicely for the Travers. We'll see what happens this weekend in the Jim Dandy. If I'm not mistaken, I think Forte's adding blinkers, so that could be interesting to see if that kind of gets him going in the right direction. If that's not true, I don't know who's adding blinkers, but someone is. And I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, that could turn out to be one heck of a Travers. Archangelo, if I'm not mistaken, is going to pass on the Jim Dandy and train up to the Travers. So you could have the Belmont winner, the Derby winner, and the 2-year-old champion all in the same race, and hopefully the 2-year-old champion comes in off of a Jim Dandy win. That makes one hell of a storyline for those 3 horses. And look, I'd imagine a horse like Arabian Night will show up there with all this time. Baffert loves those big races, and maybe Arabian Night needed one. And so it really kind of could turn out to be one hell of a race.
I was going to ask if you had any excuse for Arabian Night. Bafferts typically do not need one, but they and the way he talked about it, he did sort of talk about Taba last year like he was a work short. He talked about Arabian Night like there was no way he was going to fire anything other than his best shot. So I'm a little bit skeptical about him. We had great interview stuff with Baffert from Naomi Tucker over on the show we did, and he sounded very candid. So I don't know what I'm like throwing my hands up at Arabian Night at this point. I don't know what to make of it.
Well, I mean, I think he was ready. I think that even a Hall of Famer like Bob Baffert and Todd Pletcher can get tricked sometimes. That a horse looks ready in the morning, going six, but then gets into a pace-pressured mile and an eighth after shipping. It couldn't go the other direction. It doesn't have to, but it can go the other direction. So we'll see how he trains out of it. We'll see, obviously, being on the West Coast, you'll have a lot of published works from him that you'll be able to see, lots of opinions about his works. And look, I mean, he could come over here and I don't think he'll be the 10-1 that Arrogate was, but he could come over here a little bit forgotten with Mage taking a little bit of money, Arcangelo possibly taking some money, and maybe Forte off of a good performance this weekend, and the Jim Dandy taking some money. You might kind of get a nice little price on a Baffert runner in the Travers. I don't know if they're pointing. I just assume they are.
I just assume they are too. It just makes sense. I mean, logically speaking, I guess he could wait for September, but then there's also, what he's going to do with some of his other horses. We'll see. There'll be news about that coming up in the next couple of weeks, and we'll talk about it all here on the In the Money Media Network, both in the podcast side, where you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, or of course on our YouTube channel, In the Money Media. If you're watching along on YouTube, give us your early idea of the Travers winner. Would love to hear what other people think of this. One thing you didn't comment much on there, JK, is what you think of Go Rocket Ride going forward. Give me divisional player or right place at right time.
It feels a little right place, just right time-ish. I didn't see the figure. What was the figure?
The figure came back a 100.
Yeah, I mean, if you're running triple-digit buyers, you're a player in the division. So, I guess I need to learn more about him and what kind of trip. Was that the perfect trip for him? Did he overcome something? Need to learn a little bit more about him, who he was before the race, to understand kind of where we're going with him. But yeah, if you run triple-digit buyers, you were in the conversation for sure.
We got to talk about the other grade one, the United Nations. We're proud to work with the New York breeding program on here. And this is a nice New York bred therapist who got the job done over some of the more well-fancied rivals. I wasn't smart enough to come up with them on the day, but this was one of those results that after the fact, I was like, yeah, that's a cool result. Good to see therapist beating some of the more well-fancied names at 12-1 there with Catnip and Red Knight right in behind. Therapist, a horse that I know you're very familiar with. Were you happy to see him have his day in the sun?
Yeah, no, because I mean, I love me a New York bred. They start with an advantage. I listen to that commercial all the time in my ear on the show. But I didn't have him. It was the other maker. But I will say this, and this is the honest. This horse gives me such anxiety because, he's been on our shows a bunch. And every time he runs, every time I look down at his name, I can only think of that skit on SNL, and it makes me very, very uncomfortable that I'm going to say the wrong thing.
Yeah, because that would be it. That would be the end of you on TV, and that
just makes me very uncomfortable.
I know some of the taunting along these lines you've done with your co-hosts over the years, so we might just call that one karma.
You're right. It's true. I've messed with Lafitte one time leading up to Derby, and I felt bad about it, but he's a professional. He handled it.
And I think this was this a case of the other maker that we got that you got done there? I mean,
yeah,
this is a horse betting wise, it was a horse that would have made sense as a deep include, but I thought it was hard to key around. Catnip ended up getting absolutely hammered. I was surprised at the amount of money that one took. But the horse was probably a little bit of an overlay, at least for includes and such. But Not smart. Yeah, I like you, not smart enough to figure it out. And then whatever, I would have blown my double anyway because I was all about Arabian Night in the big one. So it just sometimes that's the way the cookie crumbles. Any other thoughts on the Haskell Day action?
No, I mean, the only thing I'll add is I thought Search Results just had a really tough trip. Uncomfortable, doesn't like being in between horses, and that's where she spent the majority of her time. I still think that she's probably a cut below the Nest and the Clariere of the world, but she's got a grade 1 with her name on it. If she can just find the right spot where one of them's probably not.
That's an interesting observation. It does seem like I've made a lot of excuses for Search Results, but it's getting a little frustrating. It's just getting a little frustrating to have been on side of so many times. Shotgun Hottie, the one who got the job done in the Molly Pitcher Stakes, that figure was a 98 for that daughter of Gunrunner. Before we get out of here in this truncated first segment, we do have to take a minute to look up north to Canada, where we had the two historically key preps, the Woodbine Oaks and the Plate Trial for the King's Plate, the newly renamed King's Plate, which will be happening, I think it's August 28th. Still trying to figure out a way, JK, if I can get up to Toronto for a day trip. If you know anybody with a private plane making the journey who wants somebody to make them cocktails on the way, let me know, and maybe I can get that bartending gig. But this was a year where I loved Wickenheiser going in, and I felt like you could make the case that Wickenheiser in the Plate Trial was a little bit pace compromised, but boy, it just didn't. Neither race came back fast, but really, in particular, the King's Plate Trial didn't come back great. So I'm wondering if this isn't a year where instead of these being the two key preps, that this is wide open for a Mission of Joy or a Calic to come from another form line and get the job done here. We ended up figures for both of them. The fillies went a little faster. I think the numbers came back like 84 and 81. I lost it here on my sheet that I'm frantically searching for. But just curious to get your thoughts on any of the action we saw up at Monmouth, especially these key preps for the King's Plate.
Yeah, I mean, there was nothing that really grabbed me in terms of the two winners, the two Marcassi runners. The winner of the Plate Trial, but then also, we've seen often before what can happen from time to time is they'll run these, they'll run the fillies in there as well. So I would imagine Elysian Field,
for sure,
would be considered as a potential runner. But to answer your question in a couple of different ways, and to also shamelessly plug, for one, I do know someone who might be going on a private plane. But if you want to get on the plane, you're going to have to call it Calic, because Bob Edwards he's a Bohemian man all winter long. He'll be very offended of you not pronouncing it Calic.
Okay, Calic.
So that's the first one.
Thank you for that.
The second thing is look, the other thing is once we get done here, I'm going to head over and we're going to record JK +1 with Bob Edwards. So that's going to be fun. And I will say this, and this is, I share stuff on these airwaves because there are airwaves more than I do other places, but I am not joking you. Last summer, we were at dinner. It was me, Bob, Chad was there, and we were having a great time. And Chad, we have it on video, which we probably could ever release. He told Bob, when this horse was a 2-year-old, that Calic's going to win the Queen's Plate. I think he said Queen's Plate because at the time it was still the Queen's Plate. Now it's going to be the King's Plate. Yes. But he told Bob, and so we joke with Chad all the time that we're going to play that video on the jumbotron when Calic's getting the trophy. So
I hope he did it. No, I mean for heel style too. I hope he was like getting.
He did. He was pointing. It was hilarious. It was very funny.
What does the name
Bob's
mean?
Dying laughing.
Now that we've gone on this.
It's a Bohemian beer. It's like their Budweiser.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
I thought you meant Bohemian, like artsy, not like, actually, coming from that part of the world. Gotcha. Well, we'll get a keg for the plane. I'll pour. Maybe we can make this work. But yeah, so that's That is actually a really, really good, really good early word there. I don't know who else is pointing. We'll see. There'll be articles. Maybe we'll do a whole Kings Play. Surely the week of we'll do a Kings Play preview show. Maybe we'll even try to do something early. Any excuse to have Jim Lawson back on the airwaves. Always love chatting with him and talking about his breeding operation. He's done, and the decision to make it the Kings Play. There's a lot of interesting stuff to unpack, and we haven't visited with him in a while. So maybe that'll be coming up sooner rather than later on these airwaves. You did a good job name checking the the winners there, but just to make sure not to give short shrift, it was Elysian Field with the 83 in the Woodbine Oaks, and it was Paramount Prince in the plate trial. Good day for Mark Cassie. I bet all his runners early. They didn't win, and then started to oppose him, and he stuffed me in a locker. Not an unfamiliar situation with me and Mark Cassie, I have to say. Just one of those trainers tricky for me to get on side with. What else, JK? Do we have any other closing thoughts? We got the plug in for JK Plus One. We'll have a big week of stuff on these airwaves. Folks can always check that out. Sign up for our free newsletter in themoneypodcast.com/email. And if you want even more, and boy, is there more this summer, in themoneypodcast.com/plus. We got Nick doing his notebook for Saratoga in addition to the free picks, and Frank Scatoni now doing the same for Del Mar with his Frankly Speaking column. Any other plugs to get in, messages, etc.? And by the way, do you pipe in the bird sound like they do at the Masters, or is that actual birds there in the backyard with you?
No, I think there's actually a bird here, and sometimes they come a little bit earlier in the morning too. But no piping of the sounds. That's a real full meal deal. No plugs really. I think what's this week? We're excited about. I'm excited to watch Echo Zulu run. I think she's freaky. I really think she's freaky. I think she's the only horse that can beat Goodnight Olive in that division, and I think her coming out party it could be this week. So I'm excited about that. Also, don't forget about Fox. Where the next 5 Saturdays, 3 to 6 p.m. will be on Fox. So on Network Fox, and make sure that we're tuning in there. And then look, I think that I just want to. There's 2 horses that I saw run this weekend that I thought were pretty darn impressive, and I want to make sure I give them a call out, which is Valentine Candy, a Justify colt that was unbelievably fast away from the gate for Ricardo Santana and Steve Asmussen. And I want to tell a little behind the scenes about that. And then also I want to tell a behind the scenes about the other Justify, Hard to Justify, that won for Chad Brown on Sunday, which was outstanding as well. So here's some fun behind the scenes stories. Ricardo tells me I'm walking with Austin, and Ricardo says, "I love my horse tomorrow." And I said, "Which one?" He goes, Justify for Asmussen. Okay. And then I text Steve Asmussen, and I said, I like to double check info. If someone tells me, I like to double check. So I text Steve Asmussen, I said, runner. And it was in kind of that loaded 2-year-old race that we talked about on Saturday, that we talked about last week on the Late Week show. And Steve said, "Can you call me?" And I was like, okay. So I called him, and he said, "Listen, this is a really nice horse, and I think this horse could be special. But I told Ricardo, you cannot try to treat this like the Derby. Do not get after him. Do not wear him out, and just let him break away from there. And if he does it on his own, fine. But do not ruin this horse just to win at Saratoga." He said, "So often people leave their horses at Saratoga. I'm not doing it with this horse. He's too talented." So I kind of go into the race thinking like, well, shit, are they going to ask the horse to win, or is he not? He's obviously good. And if you watch the stretch of that race again, watch it. Ricardo hits him one time and only one time. The rest of the time, he's just frantically waving the stick at him. That horse did that on his own. That's a very, very talented racehorse. And then on Sunday, I text Chad, "Hey, do you like your horse in the first?" It sounds like Christoph likes his a lot. And his response was, "He better." And I thought Chad's horse was brilliant. That horse had so much trouble. He got shut off on the backside, and he came running. I think that horse will looks to be the favorite for the I think was that the PG Johnson. That's the Philly race. And then if they can get that one done, I think could add to Chad's success in the Philly and Mare, or the Philly juvenile turf.
Philly's turf. Yeah, what happened? Give us the results of both of those races, and gosh, if you can pull out a figure, that'd be amazing. But don't worry about the figure. Just for those that didn't see.
No. Yeah, Valentine Candy won. Valentine Candy won impressively. Opened up, popped away from the gate. and was getting a little tired late, but was without any encouragement. Like we talked about, Ricardo was just kind of trying to hand ride home. I think it was in the 7th. It was the 7th or the 5th. Valentine Candy got an 88 time form US.
Oh, time for this. I think going to say buyer. I was going to say, wow.
No, I don't know what the buyer was. You're the buyer, man. It was on Saturday, race 7. If you want to look at that while I look at the other one, hard to justify got an 86 time form US.
Okay. So yeah, those are definitely ones to keep an eye on. First, I'll take a look at Saratoga, and we'll get this. So, which race was it on Saturday?
Saturday, race 7.
Saturday, race 7. We'll pull that chart up here momentarily. Valentine Candy beating this big full field, very similar, 66 on the Buyer Speed figure scale. These are hard races to make figures for. I would not hold that number against. And then what's the Sunday one? Sunday race
1.
And it was in the very first race on Sunday. That one came back at 59. But again, I would not. We see this time and again where they on the turf particularly, they end up improving like leaps and bounds. So I think that your high praise is still justified.
Yeah, I mean, look, not blazing on the scale, but man, they were both visually impressive, and like you said, sometimes those 2-year-old numbers can be a little bit tricky, especially with a turf course that's drying. You know, that's had rain off and on throughout the week. I think sometimes figures can be a little bit tricky there as well. So
every reason to improve, every single reason to improve too. So I'm not going to discount any of that high praise from you, Jonathan. All right. Our half hour is past. We're going to let you get on with your day. Let me get on with mine. We'll have something coming up in the back half of the show, probably a look at Wednesday's races. Leave that with me. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, check out all our podcasts. We got a lot going on. We recommend people check out the Black feed. That's the best way to get all the shows in the Money podcast, in the Money Media, wherever you get your podcasts. You'll figure it out. If you have any trouble, reach out to us. JK, until the next time.